The winter of 1482 choked the Balkan foothills in ice, famine, and silence. Luka, a shepherd's son from a plague-stricken village near Visegrad, wandered barefoot through the charred remains of what had once been his home. His mother, 2 sisters, and the family dog had died within a week of each other. The soldiers came not long after, storming through like hungry crows, Ottoman banners fluttering under gray skies. Luka did not cry when they seized him. There was no strength left in his ribs for crying. He was thrown in with other boys, some younger, most dazed, coughing blood. They were cattle, pressed into carts and marched across snow that stained red where they fell. A Turkish officer stopped when he saw Luka's face. His silence deepened. He ordered the boy be cleaned, given a new tunic, and brought separately. The next day, they washed Luka in the river with perfumed soap. His hair was combed, his teeth inspected. An old man with henna-stained fingers watched him carefully. His eyes, the man murmured in Ottoman, the nose, it's him. They whispered about Prince Sem, a child lost in a boating accident 3 years earlier. His father, Vizier Halal Pasha, had never accepted the drowning. He funded mad astrologers, called for mystics, sent riders in all directions. When he saw Luka's face, he fell to his knees. "This is no coincidence," Halal said. "Allah has returned what grief stole." The palace Mueller echoed him. A comet had passed weeks before. A goat was born with a twisted leg. These were signs, he said. Luka's arrival fulfilled an omen. Halal declared the boy sacred. Luka stood still, cold and mute, as the men bowed and praised the miracle of rebirth. He was renamed Semele, meaning the beautiful one. The name was not a suggestion. It was law. He was no longer Christian, no longer Luka. That name was not to be spoken again. That night, they shaved his head. A surgeon arrived silent, precise. Semel screamed once, then never again. When he awoke, his body felt hollow, swollen with absence. He bled for days, packed with herbs and cloth. Within a week, he was in Istanbul, carried in a private carriage to the Topkapi Saray. The air smelled of incense and lemon. Musicians played. Courtiers pretended not to look. Women behind latticed screens whispered. Semele was led barefoot across the marble floor to Hilal's private chamber. The vizier wore black robes and knelt beside the boy. "You are my son again," he said, kissing the boy's hands. Semele kept his eyes on the tiles. Every day afterward was silence and command. Tutors instructed him in Turkish, Arabic, Persian. A eunuch corrected his posture with a whip. A prince does not slouch. He ate little but dates and goat's milk. Too much meat makes the soul violent, the mullah explained. Samuel learned poetry and how to tilt his head with the proper sadness. He was never alone. There was always a pair of eyes, always a command to obey. Servants dressed him in silk, robes stitched with pomegranate designs, the favorite fruit of the dead prince. Halal read aloud from his son's favorite book of Rumi. If Semele smiled at the wrong moment, he was slapped. If he cried, he was praised. "The soul remembers," Halal whispered. "You feel it, don't you?" One night, Samuel found a polished bronze mirror left beside his bed. He stared at the face it showed, smooth, pale, blank, not his own. He couldn't remember what Luka had looked like. Only the boy everyone wanted him to be. His hand shook as he touched the reflection. It did not look back with recognition. It stared like a ghost, still and beautiful. That was the moment he understood. He was not alive to anyone in that palace. He was a relic, a substitute, a vessel for grief and madness. He whispered his old name under his breath, so softly the walls wouldn't hear. He dared not speak it again. Samuel woke before dawn each morning to the sound of bells and the slap of sandals on polished stone. A eunuch poured cold water on his face. No words, no expression. The boy's feet were bound in soft leather slippers, and he was led through corridors smelling of mold and perfume. The palace never slept. It only shifted from one performance to another. His days began in the school chamber, where old men with ink-stained fingers tested his memory. Verses from the Quran, Ottoman law, Persian epics, he recited them with flat precision. If he paused or faltered, the cane struck his palms. Pain was silent. One did not cry in the house of felicity. Behind him, other boys sat in rows. Some stared ahead like statues. Others twitched with fear. None spoke unless asked. Meals were given in silence. A bowl of lentils, a strip of bread, sometimes dried figs. No meat, no spice. They said it kept the mind pure and the body controlled. Semmel's skin turned pale. His teeth ached. His ribs began to show. He asked no questions. Between lessons, he was drilled in posture and grace. He learned how to move with calculated softness, how to bow exactly 7 degrees, how to play the reed flute with fingers so delicate they did not seem to belong to a body that once climbed trees and fought in mud. Every motion mattered. The wrong glance, a crooked toe, could result in punishment. He bathed in silence. Water was poured over him by other concubines, their eyes never meeting his. Once, another boy whispered in Greek, asking if Semio remembered the outside world. A guard overheard. That boy was never seen again. No one spoke after that. Words were dangerous. He was made to wear pale blue silk. His hair was oiled and curled. Kohl lined his eyes, and saffron was rubbed beneath his chin to mimic the glow of health. These were not costumes. They were his new skin. He was not allowed to undress himself. That was done by attendants. Every gesture was performance. The smallest error could shame the visitor. And so, Semio became still. Alexios, an older eunuch, who could not speak, brought him a stolen date once, hidden in his sleeve. It was sweet and soft. The first act of kindness since Luca had died. He never asked for another. Kindness had a cost. Once a week, he was summoned to Halal's private chamber. The vizier asked him to sit by the fire and read aloud. The same poems, the same stories. When Semmel's voice cracked from hunger, Halal wept and said, "It's as if he never left." The boy knew better than to speak. Every page turned was a reminder that his life was no longer his. He existed to resurrect a dead prince. The palace was vast, but Semmel's world was narrow. The training chamber, the bathhouse, the prayer room, the bed, he saw the same faces, heard the same footsteps, smelled the same incense. Even his dreams began to repeat. Once, during a lunar eclipse, the boys were woken at midnight. They were made to walk barefoot in a circle over salt while the mullah recited prayers against spirits. Semmel's feet bled, but he said nothing. The mullah claimed evil entered the body through rebellion. Salt would purify the flesh. The next morning, 2 boys were missing. The servants refused to speak of them. Time passed without seasons. There were no windows in Semmel's room. The stars were a rumor. Birds were heard but never seen. He tried to count days, but lost track. Illness came and went. A rash on his back, coughing fits in the cold baths. No one treated him unless he fainted. Then he was given bitter herbs and silence. Servants whispered of the old cistern beneath the kitchens. Boys who failed to please were said to be sent there. When Semio made a mistake in reciting a prayer, a guard looked at him long and hard before nodding once. No words, just a nod. It was enough. The silence was its own language. Everyone understood what could not be said. He had not spoken his real name in months. It faded like a dream. He began to forget what his mother's voice sounded like, what bread with butter tasted like, what snow felt like on bare skin. Luca had disappeared. In his place, Semio moved, breathed, obeyed. In the palace of obedience, survival meant vanishing into expectation. The more invisible he became, the safer he was. The sickness began with a cough that echoed through the stone halls. One servant vanished, then a bath attendant, The air grew heavy with incense and whispers. No one said the word, but everyone knew fever was spreading. The eunuch scrubbed the floors with vinegar. All meals were halved. No one was allowed near the outer gates. Those who coughed too loudly were removed and not seen again. Alexios collapsed during morning prayers. He was gone by nightfall. Samiel found his sleeping mat rolled and burned. In his place, a new boy with hollow eyes stood silently. Samiel said nothing. He felt nothing. Grief had become useless. His own body betrayed him next. The delicate, rounded face that had once been praised, now sharpened. His voice no longer carried the soft lilt Hillel favored. Bones lengthened. His skin darkened under the sun of the training yard. The resemblance was fading. He caught his reflection, and saw not a ghost of the dead prince, but a stranger. He could no longer play the part. That terrified everyone, Hillel noticed. The vizier's eyes lingered too long. His tone changed. Where once there were poems and soft touches, there was distance. One night, Hillel asked him to repeat a story the prince had loved. Semele hesitated, uncertain of the words. The vizier struck him across the cheek. "You forget what matters," he said coldly. "Are you forgetting who you are?" The following day Semele was denied food. The tutors were dismissed. The silence around him became complete. He was sent to the old baths, locked alone for a night and day. No bedding, only cold tiles. Water dripped from the ceiling. His breath came in shallow waves. He did not cry. Crying would give someone satisfaction. When the door opened, a mueller and 2 guards entered. Samuel was forced to kneel. They brought a basin of freezing water. Without speaking, the guards held him down as the mueller performed a cleansing rite. Samuel's head was dunked again and again. He gasped and choked. The mueller recited verses about rebellion and impurity. He who forgets his purpose invites the devil into his soul. They left him there, wet and shaking. Days blurred. He was no longer brought to the main chambers. He ate alone, bathed alone, studied nothing. The silence grew thicker. One evening, he dared ask a servant where the other concubines had gone. The servant averted his eyes and muttered, "You are not meant to ask." The vizier summoned him again, but this time the room was cold. Hillel stared at him as if looking through glass. "You're not him anymore," he said. "The eyes are wrong." Samiel bowed, said nothing. Hillel's next words were for the guards. "Keep him until he remembers." Punishment came in increments. First, the stone room, no light, no sound, for days. Then, kneeling on gravel until his legs bled. Then, silence. No one addressed him. No one used his name. When finally released, he was returned to a chamber smaller than his old stable back home. There was no bedding, only a mat. Meals were crusts and water. He was expected to perform nightly ablutions, though the water froze in its bowl. His cough returned. He scratched his old name into the wall with a broken spoon. Luca. The letters were crooked, faint, but they were his. The only thing that belonged to him. He whispered it each night. Not for memory, for resistance. The high priest visited the palace days later. The court staged a display: new concubines, musicians, incense. Semele was not summoned. He watched, from a corner, unseen. One of the new boys had the prince's nose, the right tilt of the smile. Hillel laughed at something the boy said. Semele turned away. He was no longer needed. Not beautiful enough. Not obedient enough. Not ghostly enough. His rebellion was not loud. It was not even seen. It was a refusal to vanish entirely. A refusal to forget who he had been. Even if no one else remembered, he would. Even if it cost him the last of his breath. Winter returned, without notice. The walls of the palace grew damp. The oil lamps burned lower, and Semele's room began to rot from the corners. No one came for him anymore. He woke each morning to the same cracked ceiling, the same crust of bread, the same silence. When he coughed blood, no one answered. His bones ached from cold and malnutrition, but his limbs moved automatically, carrying out the motions of survival, with no thought left behind his eyes. The other boys had changed, younger, paler, more polished. They passed him in corridors without recognition. Some whispered about him, how he had once been favored, how he was now cursed. A servant refused to take his empty dish one evening. "They say you carry plague in your breath," she muttered, backing away. Samiel didn't answer. He hadn't spoken in days. His voice was brittle. Every syllable felt foreign. The vizier no longer acknowledged him. When they crossed paths near the prayer hall, Halal looked past him like one looks past old furniture, something too familiar to notice but too useless to keep. A new boy walked beside him, hand in hand, with eyes carefully lowered. The resemblance was uncanny. Samiel studied the boy's face, trying to see what Halal saw. He didn't see a child. He saw a reflection sharpened and replaced. Soon after, his name was removed from the palace register. He was no longer scheduled for meals, no longer listed for inspection. An old washerwoman found him sitting near the kitchens and quietly handed him a piece of roasted chestnut wrapped in cloth. She didn't say a word. He nodded once. She understood. Kindness had become a secret act of rebellion. Servants changed. Guards changed. Even the hallways seemed altered, unfamiliar. Semmel's world had shrunk to his room, the corridor leading to the old cistern, and the shadow he cast in dim candlelight. He no longer hoped to be seen, but he feared being erased. One morning, he woke and couldn't stand. His legs buckled. He crawled to the door and leaned against it, listening. No footsteps, no call to prayer, just wind rattling through the cracks. Hours passed. The bread did not come. That night, the cold cut through his thin robes. He pulled them tighter and whispered the name again, Luca. He couldn't recall his mother's face, but the name still held shape in his mouth. 2 days later, the washerwoman returned. She found him half-conscious, his lips dry, breath shallow. She pressed water to his mouth and waited. He didn't open his eyes. She stayed until he stopped moving. Then she covered his face with the cloth. He was taken through the servants' tunnel by 2 workers with no names. There was no ceremony, no prayer. He was wrapped in linen, tossed into a covered cart with broken pots, spoiled meat, and torn linens. The palace records listed no death. He was never there. Outside the walls, beyond the cypress trees, the plague pit lay open. Fires smoked in the distance. Dogs barked from the far side of the ridge. Semmel's body was added to the pile anonymous, weightless. The pit swallowed hundreds that month. No markers, no memories. The washerwoman never spoke of him again. But on her last day at the palace, she walked once more past the empty room he had lived in. On the wall, still faint beneath dust and soot, were 4 letters scratched into the stone. Luca. Years passed. The palace transformed. New sultans, new viziers, new boys. No one spoke of the old ones. The archives held no record of Semilor Luca. The court chroniclers recorded victories, feasts, treaties, but not the ghosts. Centuries later, a scholar, reading old property records, found reference to one mute boy kept in quarters of the late Halal Pasha, dismissed. No name, no date of death. Just dismissed. And so it ended. One among thousands, faces reshaped, voices stolen, histories discarded. Not for who they were, but for who others needed them to become. They lived in the cracks of empires, and when they died, the silence swallowed them whole.